Welcome back to Audible Archives. I'm Nayara, and tonight we reach the final chapters of Mistwoven Legends, The Awakening Dream. The journey so far has carried us through shifting realms, unraveling secrets, and battles where dreams and reality collide. Now, in chapters 12 to 20, every choice comes to its reckoning, and the awakening dream will demand its final price. If you haven't already, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because tonight marks the end of Book 1, but the legend is only just beginning.
Chapter 12. Abyssal Conspiracy. The air in the chamber of the Abyssal Weavers felt different now, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Reverie had crossed the threshold into the unknown, but the path ahead was even more treacherous than she had anticipated. The abyss was no longer a distant threat, a mere concept to be feared and avoided. It was here at the very heart of this secret faction, whispering its truths into the ears of those brave enough, or foolish enough, to listen. Her mind raced, every word spoken by the Abyssal Weavers reverberating through her thoughts, their promises of power and transcendence seeping deeper into her consciousness. But it wasn't just the allure of the abyss that troubled her. There was something darker, more insidious lurking in the shadows, something that had begun to shift her understanding of the world she had known for so long. It started subtly at first. A phrase here, a passing comment there, dropped casually into conversation like a breadcrumb that, when followed, led down a path Reverie never imagined she would walk. "We are not the only ones who know the truth, you know." The woman who had first greeted Reverie, the leader of the Abyssal Weavers, spoke one evening, her voice low and conspiratorial. "There are those in Dormiria's ruling council who are fully aware of the abyss's true potential. They've known all along, and yet they choose to keep it hidden from the rest of us. They've manipulated the teachings of our order to ensure that no one ever discovers its true purpose." Reverie froze at the words. The weight of them was like a crushing blow. The council knows? She had always trusted the council, believed in its wisdom, its centuries of tradition that governed the Dream Weavers. How could they have been hiding such a crucial truth from her, from all of them? "What do you mean?" Reverie's voice trembled with a mix of disbelief and mounting suspicion. "How could they know? The council has always condemned the abyss, warning us to stay far from it. They say it is a force of destruction, a corruption that can't be contained. If they knew what you're saying, why would they keep it from us?" The woman, who went by the name Alice, regarded her with a gaze that was both knowing and sorrowful. "Because they want to keep us in the dark. The abyss is not a simple force of corruption as the council would have you believe. It is power, the kind of power that could shatter their control over Dormiria, over all of us. They have their reasons for suppressing it, for keeping us ignorant. They've built their entire society around the idea that dream weaving is a delicate art, something that must be controlled, contained. The abyss doesn't fit into that picture." Reverie felt a chill run down her spine. "But why? Why would they want to hide something like that from us? If it's such a powerful tool, shouldn't we all have access to it?" Alice's eyes flickered with a mix of pity and anger. "Because it doesn't serve their purpose. The council, the ruling powers in Dormiria, they've created a system built on limitations. They tell you that the abyss is a curse because it doesn't fit their ideals of control and order. But the truth is much darker. The abyss offers freedom, a freedom they cannot allow." The words hung in the air like an unsettling fog. Reverie's thoughts whirled. She had always trusted the council, had always believed their teachings were for the greater good of Dormiria. But now, doubts began to gnaw at her, questioning everything she had been taught. "If the abyss is so powerful," Reverie asked slowly, "why hasn't it consumed them? Why haven't the council members fallen, if they know what we could do with its power?" Alice gave a bitter laugh. "Because they've already made their pact with it. The leaders of Dormiria are not immune to its pull. They've learned how to wield the abyss for their own purposes, to control it in ways that keep the rest of us in the dark. But they are not unaffected. They have sacrificed pieces of themselves, parts of their own humanity, to maintain their hold on power. The abyss doesn't come without a price. Revery's heart pounded in her chest. The idea of the council, the very institution she had devoted herself to, working with the abyss in secret was enough to make her stomach turn. But what Alice had said next was even more disturbing. You see, Reverie, it isn't the abyss that's the true threat. It's the council's manipulation of it. They use the fear of the abyss to control us, to keep us in line. They tell us that it is something to fear, something to avoid at all costs. But in reality, they are the ones who control the narrative, who control how we see the abyss. If we were to understand its true nature, if we were to see it for what it really is, the entire structure of power in Dormiria would collapse. Reverie's mind reeled. The abyss was not the enemy. It was the council itself, or rather the leaders within it, who had twisted the very essence of the abyss to their own gain. They had turned it into a tool of oppression, a mechanism to maintain control over the Dreamweavers, over the entire city. And they had done so by distorting the truth, by keeping it hidden from everyone else. Are you saying, Reverie asked slowly, that the abyss could be a force for good? That it could offer us something the council has denied us? Alice met her gaze, her eyes burning with conviction. I believe it could. The abyss offers freedom, creativity, and power, things the council has chosen to deny us because they fear what would happen if we were free. If we were truly able to tap into the abyss's potential, there would be no limits to what we could achieve. The dreamscape would no longer be a prison of rules and regulations. It would be a canvas for all of us, for everyone who is brave enough to take it. Reverie felt the weight of those words pressing on her chest. The promise of something more, something beyond the constraints she had lived with all her life, was a temptation unlike any she had ever felt. But the implications were terrifying. If she embraced the abyss and its power, what would she become? Could she truly control it, or would it control her as Cyrena had warned? I'm not sure I understand, Reverie said, her voice wavering. How can I know what's true? How can I trust you when everything I've been taught tells me the opposite? Alice stepped closer, her voice softer now, but no less urgent. Because you've seen it for yourself, Reverie. You've felt its power, its pull. You've touched the abyss and survived. That's not by accident. You have potential. You have the strength to see beyond what they've taught you, to unlock the power that lies hidden. But you must make a choice. The abyss offers you the freedom they've denied you, the truth they've kept from you. But that truth comes at a cost. Reverie's thoughts were a whirlwind, her heart racing as she grappled with the enormity of what she was being asked. The abyss could offer freedom, power, but at what price? Was the council truly the villain in this story, or was it simply protecting the Dreamweavers from something far worse? Could the abyss truly be controlled, or would it destroy everything she had worked for? She didn't know the answers. But for the first time, Reverie realized that she could no longer trust the truths she had been taught. She had seen enough to understand that there were dark forces at play in Dormiria, forces that sought to control the dreamscape, to suppress the truth. And she was standing at the crossroads, poised between the comfort of the familiar and the terrifying unknown. The choice was hers to make. Would she stand with the council, upholding the world she had always known, or would she embrace the abyss, risking everything for the possibility of something greater? The whispers of rebellion grew louder in her mind, and for the first time, Reverie felt the stirrings of something much more powerful than fear. It was curiosity, yes, but it was also something else, something far more dangerous. It was the hunger for the truth. Chapter 13. A Mortal Plea. Reverie had spent the last few days immersed in the dark truths of the abyss, grappling with the revelation that everything she had once believed could be a lie. Dormiria, her home, the council she had sworn to uphold, all of it now seemed tainted by the suspicion that everything she had been taught was a carefully crafted facade. But just as her thoughts grew heavy with doubt, something pulled her away from the abyss and back to her roots as a dream weaver. A mortal had come to Dormiria, seeking help. Reverie could feel the pull of the dreamscape as the request reached her. It was an unusual summons, unlike the typical disturbances she had dealt with before. This one was personal in a way she hadn't anticipated. The mortal was a man named Ilias, a former soldier who had been plagued by a recurring nightmare for years. A nightmare that he could not escape no matter how hard he tried. The same images, the same terror played in his mind every night. His face had an exhausted, haunted look, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights spent tossing and turning. There was something in his gaze, something raw, that spoke to a deeper anguish. Reverie had seen that kind of torment before in the eyes of the broken and the lost. The kind of people who had seen things they couldn't forget, things they couldn't undo. She found him in the city's infirmary, his trembling hands clutching the edges of his worn cloak. He looked up at her, a flash of recognition and relief passing across his face. "You're a dream weaver," he said, his voice hoarse. "You can help me, can't you?" Reverie nodded, though a pang of unease settled in her chest. It wasn't often she took on cases like this, ones where the past seemed so tightly wound into the present. She had always been able to navigate the dreams of others, soothe the nightmares and guide them toward peace. But there was something about Ilias's plea that felt different, like it was reaching for something deeper, something hidden in the dark corners of his soul. "I'll do what I can," Reverie said gently, though even as she spoke, she wondered if she was truly prepared to face what lay ahead. Ilias's nightmare had been relentless. He described it as an endless battlefield, one where he was trapped, forced to relive the moment of his greatest failure. The sounds of war, shouts, clashing swords, and the screams of the fallen echoed in his mind. But it wasn't just the violence that haunted him. It was the face of his younger brother, whom he had failed to save in the heat of battle. The boy's final cry still echoed in his ears every night, his eyes filled with betrayal, anger, and the accusation that Ilias had abandoned him. The dream had been unshakable, pulling Ilias back into the horror every time he closed his eyes. And with every night that passed, the dream grew worse. The boy's face, once filled with anger, now twisted into something darker, something more monstrous. It was a reminder of the guilt that had gnawed at Ilias for so long. Reverie felt a knot form in her stomach. Guilt. The same guilt that plagued so many others in her own life. The feeling that one could never truly escape the past, no matter how much they wished to forget it. And now, it seemed that Ilias's nightmare was not just a reflection of his inner turmoil, but a force unto itself, one that had taken on a life of its own. The echoes of the past had become so powerful that they were now invading his dreams, locking him in an endless cycle of suffering. Reverie prepared herself. As a dream weaver, it was her duty to guide people through their nightmares, to help them confront their fears and heal from their traumas. But as she prepared to enter Ilias's dream, she realized that this would be unlike any dreamscape she had ever navigated. This dream was not simply a manifestation of fear. It was an extension of the man himself, a manifestation of his guilt, his grief, and his regret. She could sense the weight of his emotions pressing down on her, as though the very air around her was thick with sorrow. With a steady breath, Reverie reached into the dreamscape, allowing her mind to slip into the darkness of Ilias's nightmare. The world that greeted her was bleak and distorted, like a battlefield frozen in time. The ground was scarred, blood-stained, and the sky overhead was a sickly shade of gray. The sounds of war were omnipresent, clashing steel, distant cries, the thundering hooves of war horses. It felt real, more real than any nightmare she had encountered before. She moved through the landscape, the wind biting at her skin as the echoes of battle grew louder. She could feel Ilias's presence here, somewhere in the distance, his consciousness trapped in this hellish loop. Reverie's heart quickened as she moved closer, sensing the growing intensity of his emotions. There, standing amidst the carnage, was Ilias. His eyes were wide, bloodshot with fear and regret, his body frozen in place as he watched the tragic scene unfold before him. She could see his younger brother lying on the ground, his chest bleeding, his hand outstretched toward Ilias. The boy's eyes were full of accusation. "I tried to save you," Ilias whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I tried, but it was too late. The nightmare twisted and contorted as though reacting to his words. The scene before her darkened, the battlefield becoming more oppressive, the faces of the fallen warping into grotesque figures. They turned toward Ilias, their eyes filled with hatred and sorrow, their voices rising in a cacophony of accusations. You abandoned me, one of them hissed. Why didn't you save us? Another voice screamed. Reverie felt the weight of those words, their pain, their anger. It was no longer just Ilias's guilt. It was now the collective weight of everyone he had failed, every life he had been unable to save. She stepped forward, reaching for him. Ilias, she said softly, her voice cutting through the chaos. This isn't real. These are not your failures, they are your fears. Your guilt. But you must let go of it or it will consume you. Ilias's gaze met hers, but it was distant, lost in the turmoil of his past. I couldn't save him, he murmured. He was my brother. I was supposed to protect him, but I failed. Reverie placed a hand on his trembling shoulder. You did what you could. You are not responsible for the things that were beyond your control. The past is behind you. It's time to let go of the weight it carries. For a moment, the nightmare faltered. The battlefield around them began to shift, the monstrous faces of the fallen warping into fleeting shadows. But just as it seemed the nightmare might recede, it surged forward, more violent than before. The image of Ilias's brother appeared again, his face now contorted into a hideous mask of rage. You failed me, the boy hissed, his voice now cold and otherworldly. You could have saved me, but you didn't. Reverie's heart ached with the intensity of Ilias's pain. But she knew that this wasn't real. This was his mind, broken and twisted by guilt. And now it was time to confront it. You have to face your fear, Reverie said, her voice growing firmer. You have to forgive yourself, Ilias. The past can't be undone. But you can choose to move forward. You can choose to release the weight you've been carrying all this time. Ilias's eyes were filled with tears, the pain of years of regret and sorrow written clearly across his face. Slowly, his hand reached out toward the image of his brother, but instead of grasping for him, he let the illusion slip through his fingers. The dreamscape around them began to shift once more, the twisted battlefield receding into a quiet, peaceful meadow. The air was warm, the sun shining brightly overhead. And for the first time in years, Ilias felt the burden of his guilt lift, just slightly as he stood there beside Reverie. You don't have to carry this anymore, she whispered, her voice full of compassion. Forgiveness is not for the dead. It is for the living. You must forgive yourself. Ilias's shoulders trembled, but the weight on his heart seemed to ease. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of peace. He had confronted the nightmare, and in doing so he had confronted himself. When Reverie finally led him back to the waking world, the change was palpable. Ilias was still broken, but there was a quiet strength in him now, a sense of resolution that hadn't been there before. He wasn't healed, no one could be after so much trauma, but the nightmare had been lifted. He could finally breathe again. Reverie watched him leave, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this was only one battle in a war many would never truly win. But she had helped, if only for a moment. And as she turned to leave, she couldn't help but wonder, could the same forgiveness she had offered to Ilias be something she could extend to herself? Could she, too, forgive the weight she had been carrying, her doubts, her fear, her growing connection to the abyss? The echoes of the past would always be there, but it was the choices made in the present that would shape the future. Chapter 14. The Abyss Unleashed. The dreamscape was a place of delicate balance, a reflection of the mortal's mind shaped by fears, desires, and memories. Reverie had walked through many such realms, woven them, mended the fractured pieces of shattered souls, but this one was different. It felt uncomfortably still, as though it held its breath, waiting for something to tip the scale. The world around her was dark, cloaked in thick shadows, yet it was strangely beautiful, with the faintest flicker of light, like the first stars appearing at dusk. Ilias's nightmare had been banished. The oppressive weight of his guilt had dissolved, and the tragic images of his past had receded into the ether. The boy's accusatory face, once twisted with rage and sorrow, had faded, leaving only an empty void in its wake. But that void was not gone. It lingered in Reverie's own chest, a creeping ache that gnawed at her core. She had been here before, standing on the edge of the abyss, its whispers calling out to her, promising power beyond comprehension. But this time it wasn't just an urge. The abyss was more than an idea, a concept that could be avoided. It was alive within her, pulsing like a second heartbeat, filling the empty spaces inside. Reverie had chosen to fight it at first. She had resisted the temptation, telling herself that the abyss was nothing more than a dangerous force, one that could not be trusted. But now, as she stood amidst the dreamscape, the pull was undeniable. The more she resisted, the louder the whispers grew, until they consumed her thoughts entirely. Her hands trembled as she reached into the dreamscape, a familiar motion she had done countless times before. But now there was no restraint. She allowed the abyss to pour through her, feeding on her fear, her uncertainty, her hidden desires. Her fingers glowed with an unearthly light, and as she wove the dream for Ilias, it shifted, twisting into something new. The dreamscape began to stabilize as it always did when she weaved it. But this time it was perfect, flawless. Every detail, every element fell into place with startling precision. The air grew lighter, more vibrant, the colors of the landscape sharpening into a vivid clarity that Reverie had never experienced before. The boundaries between the waking world and the dreamscape blurred as she wove the threads of Ilias's mind into something more than she had intended. It was not just a healing of his nightmare. It was a transformation. She could feel the energy coursing through her, far more potent than any dream-weaving power she had ever wielded. It wasn't just her skills as a dream weaver anymore. It was the abyss itself, shaping the world to her will. The pull of it was intoxicating, and in that moment Reverie understood why so many had fallen to it. The abyss was power, pure and unbridled, a force that bent reality itself to its whims. The dreamscape she had crafted for Ilias was no longer just a reflection of his mind. It had become something else entirely, something beyond her control. As she shaped the final threads of the dream, she felt a presence, a familiar warmth, a comforting embrace. She turned, and there, standing before her, was Ilias, his face serene for the first time in years. His eyes, once filled with sorrow and regret, were now clear, calm, and full of gratitude. "I can't believe it," he whispered, stepping closer. "It's gone. The nightmare. It's all gone." Reverie nodded, a strange, hollow satisfaction filling her chest. She had done it. She had saved him. The nightmare had ended. But at what cost? The abyss was still there, surging beneath the surface of her mind, waiting. It was a presence she could not ignore anymore. It had seeped into her very being, and as Ilias's dream shifted into something harmonious, she could feel herself growing heavier with each passing moment. It was as if the dreamscape itself had become a reflection of her own mind, a mirror that revealed the darkness she had tried so hard to deny. The power of the abyss was both a gift and a curse. She could feel it in every fiber of her being, in the trembling of her hands, in the rapid beating of her heart. As the dream began to stabilize, Reverie's eyes flickered with an almost eerie light. The world around her began to warp and shift, no longer tethered to the mortal realm. The dreamscape was still perfect, yes, but it was too perfect. Unnaturally so. The boundaries had blurred completely. It no longer felt like she was simply shaping a dream. It felt like she was controlling reality itself. I've done it," Reverie muttered to herself, the words barely leaving her lips. Her voice trembled with a mix of awe and fear. "I've brought the dream to life." But as the last remnants of the nightmare dissipated, something changed in the air. The calm serenity that had enveloped Ilias's dream began to shift, becoming darker, colder. The perfect illusion Reverie had woven began to unravel at the edges, the strands of her control fraying as if the very fabric of the dream could no longer sustain the force she had unleashed. Ilias's expression shifted, his smile fading as he looked around. What's happening? This isn't right. This isn't how it was supposed to be. Reverie's stomach dropped as she felt the ground beneath her tremble. The whispers of the abyss were growing louder, more insistent, as though they had gained a foothold in this world. They were no longer mere whispers. They were a chorus, filling her mind with promises of more. More power. More control. Ilias, Reverie whispered, her voice shaking. We need to leave. This isn't real. This is not what I intended. But it was too late. The dream had already been consumed by the abyss. The edges of the world warped, twisting into dark, shadowy tendrils that reached out and began to pull everything into its depths. The ground cracked open, revealing the churning, chaotic void below. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the very essence of the dreamscape had been tainted, corrupted by the energy Reverie had called forth. Ilias! Reverie cried, reaching out for him, but the man was gone, his figure disintegrating into 1,000 shards of light as the abyss consumed him. The world around her began to collapse, the perfect dream unraveling into a whirlwind of darkness. Reverie tried to hold on to regain control, but the abyss had taken root. It was no longer something she could simply weave or control. It was consuming her, and with every passing second she felt herself slipping further and further into its grasp. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to pull herself back, to sever the connection to the abyss. But the more she tried, the more it tightened around her, its grip unyielding. It was as if she were drowning, suffocating in the very energy she had once thought she could control. And then, with a final overwhelming surge, the abyss exploded into full force, flooding the dreamscape. Reverie was swept away, her mind consumed by the void. The last thing she saw before the world around her turned black was a single haunting reflection of her own face, twisted and distorted by the energy she had unleashed. When Reverie awoke, she was back in the waking world, gasping for air, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the abyss's power. Her head throbbed, the weight of her actions pressing down on her chest. She had done it. She had unleashed the abyss, and in doing so had created something far worse than she could have imagined. Her hands shook as she reached for the floor, steadying herself, but the feeling didn't fade. It wasn't just the power of the abyss that lingered. It was the sense of dependence that gnawed at her soul, the understanding that once she had tasted its power, she could never truly be free of it. It would call to her, demand more, and sooner or later she would answer. The perfect dreamscape had been shattered, and in its place, there was only the abyss, waiting to consume everything in its path. And Reverie knew with a cold certainty that this was only the beginning. Chapter 15. The Council's Wrath. The marble halls of Dormiria were eerily silent as Reverie walked toward the central chamber, each step heavier than the last. The weight of her actions pressed down on her chest, her thoughts swirling in a haze of confusion, guilt, and fear. She had known this moment was coming. The dreamscape she had woven for Ilias was flawless, yes, but it had come at a cost, a price she hadn't fully understood until it was too late. The abyss had been unleashed, and now she had to face the consequences. The council had summoned her. She could feel their presence looming over her like a storm, their judgment waiting to descend. The air was thick with the tension of unspoken words, of the many eyes that had been watching her every move. The whispers of the abyss still echoed in her mind, and as much as she tried to push them away, they clung to her thoughts, filling the empty spaces left by the doubt creeping into her soul. Reverie had once believed the council to be her guiding light, a bastion of order and wisdom. But now, as she entered the chamber, the weight of their authority felt like a suffocating shroud. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, the floor polished to a mirror-like sheen. At the center of the room stood the 5 members of the council, their faces solemn and unreadable. At the far end of the chamber, the tallest of them all, Raul, spoke first. His voice was deep, commanding, and as cold as the stone beneath Reverie's feet. Reverie, Dreamweaver, he began, his gaze piercing. You have been summoned here today to answer for your transgressions. You are accused of tainting the dreamscape with forbidden power, of allowing the influence of the abyss to bleed into the very fabric of our realm. How do you plead? The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. Reverie's throat tightened, and for a moment she struggled to find her voice. She had always been able to speak with confidence, to weave words as easily as she wove dreams. But now, in the face of the council's wrath, she was unsure of herself. The abyss had changed everything. I did not intend for it to go this far, Reverie finally said, her voice shaky but steady. I sought only to help. The mortal Ilias needed my assistance. His nightmare was consuming him, and I thought I could help him overcome it. But something happened. Something I didn't fully understand. The abyss. It became part of the dream. I didn't intend for it to bleed into the waking world, but it did. Ralvin's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. And you chose to harness the power of the abyss, knowing full well what it is capable of? Did you think we would not notice? We are not blind, Reverie. The balance has been disrupted, and it is your doing. You have summoned chaos into our world. Reverie's heart sank. She could feel the accusation in his words, the condemnation that weighed heavily in the room. But she could not deny it. She had used the abyss, had allowed its power to flow through her, to shape the very fabric of the dreamscape. And now that power had seeped into the waking world, leaving a trail of corruption in its wake. I thought I could control it, Reverie said, her voice faltering as she fought to keep her composure. I thought I could help him without harming anyone. I was wrong. The abyss is too powerful. It changed the dream, and in doing so it changed me. I can feel it inside me, Ralvin. It's taking hold of me. For a moment there was silence. The council exchanged glances, their faces unreadable, their judgment not yet made. Then Lyra, the youngest and most compassionate of the council members, spoke. Her voice was softer, but the weight of her words was no less powerful. You have fallen prey to the same temptation that has claimed others before you, Reverie. The abyss is not a tool to be wielded. It is a corruption, a force that consumes all who seek to control it. You have been touched by it, and now you must face the consequences of your actions. Reverie bowed her head, her thoughts a swirl of conflicting emotions. She had heard the stories, the warnings about the abyss, about those who had tried to use it and failed. She had believed, like so many others, that she could control it, that she could wield its power without being consumed. But now, standing before the council, she realized how foolish she had been. I didn't want to hurt anyone, Reverie whispered, her voice cracking. I wanted to help, but I can't deny that I've brought this upon myself. I've let the abyss into my heart. Ralvin's gaze softened, but only slightly. You have shown remorse, Reverie, but that does not change the fact that you have disrupted the very foundation of our world. The abyss is a force that we cannot allow to take root. We cannot allow it to spread any further. And we cannot allow you to continue as a dream weaver under these circumstances. Reverie's breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming, but hearing the words made them feel all the more real. Exile. Banishment. She had failed. She had let the temptation of power overtake her duty, and now she would pay the price. You must leave Dormiria, Ralvin said, his voice firm, final. You will be exiled from this realm, stripped of your title and your position as a dreamweaver. You will not be allowed to return until you have proven that you can rid yourself of the abyss and its influence. Only then may you seek redemption if it can be found. Reverie's world seemed to tilt, the ground beneath her feet shifting as though the very foundation of her existence had been shattered. She had spent her life weaving dreams, helping those in need, guiding lost souls through the labyrinth of their own minds. And now, in a single moment, it was all gone. The council, her mentors, her colleagues, everyone she had ever known, had turned their backs on her. I understand, Reverie said, her voice hollow, her heart heavy with the weight of her failure. She turned slowly, her feet dragging as she made her way toward the exit. The chamber felt colder now, emptier. She had not expected mercy, but the finality of their judgment was still a blow. As Reverie reached the door, Lyra spoke again, her voice quiet but full of a deep sorrow that Reverie hadn't expected. "There is still time to turn back, Reverie. The abyss has not consumed you completely yet. You still have a chance." But Reverie did not turn around. She could feel the presence of the abyss within her, like a shadow that had followed her for too long. It was tempting, whispering to her even now, urging her to embrace it fully. The power it offered was intoxicating, overwhelming. But she knew deep down that Lyra's words were true. There was still time, still a chance for her to escape the grip of the abyss. As Reverie stepped into the cold air outside the council's chamber, she knew that her journey was far from over. The abyss was a darkness she would have to confront within herself. The road ahead would not be easy, and the path to redemption seemed impossible. But as long as she lived, there was still hope. And she would fight to reclaim herself, to undo the damage she had caused, and to ensure that the abyss would never again hold sway over her. With every step she took away from the council, Reverie could feel the pull of the abyss growing stronger, but she refused to give in. Not yet. She had been cast out, but she was not broken. Not yet. And somehow she knew that was the first step toward redemption. Chapter 16. Exile and Awakening. The world outside Dormiria was unlike anything Reverie had known. Gone were the familiar marble halls, the golden light of the council's chambers, the quiet hum of dream weavers shaping and mending the tapestry of the dreamscape. Now she stood alone in the wild expanse, the very air heavy with uncertainty, every step forward feeling as though she were being pulled deeper into an unknown abyss. Not just the one within her, but the one that stretched before her, dark and boundless. The weight of exile pressed on her shoulders, and with every step, Reverie felt the distance between herself and everything she had known. She was no longer a dream weaver. She was something else now. Something forged in the fires of her own mistakes and the consuming allure of the abyss. She had been cast out of Dormiria, exiled from the only home she had ever known. But as the golden walls of her past faded behind her, a new understanding began to take root within her, one that would alter everything. Reverie had been warned. She had been told that the abyss was a dangerous force, one that corrupted and consumed. But what the council failed to reveal, the part they had hidden from her, from everyone, was that the abyss was not inherently evil. It was not a force to be feared in and of itself, nor was it a tool that only brought ruin. It was something far more complex, something that had the potential for both creation and destruction. It was a blank canvas, shaped by the hands of those who dared to wield it. And now Reverie stood at the threshold of its true power, ready to embrace whatever it held, whatever she could learn from it. The first days after her banishment were filled with restlessness. Reverie wandered the lands outside Dormiria, her mind spinning with the endless questions that now clouded her thoughts. She had seen glimpses of the abyss before, in her dreams, in her work as a dream weaver. But those had been fragments, shadows on the edge of her perception. Now it was within her, a presence that she could not shake, a weight that pressed on her every thought, urging her to understand it, to see it for what it truly was. She had been told over and over that it was a force of corruption, of chaos. But why then did it feel so familiar to her? Why did it call to her so strongly, like a missing piece of her soul? The more she resisted, the more the abyss pressed on her consciousness. The more she embraced it, the more it revealed itself. Layer by layer, like peeling away the skin of an onion, each layer deeper and more revealing than the last. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, Reverie reached the heart of the abyss. The landscape shifted as she entered, the world around her folding into a familiar yet strange form. The darkness here was not oppressive, not stifling. Instead, it felt expansive, almost infinite, like the very fabric of existence had been torn open, revealing the raw potential beneath it. The air shimmered with an energy she had never felt before, vibrant and alive, yet quiet in its own way, like the hum of a distant melody that only she could hear. It was here, in this liminal space, that Reverie made her first true discovery. The abyss was not a curse, nor was it a blessing. It was a tool that could shape reality itself. The abyss was like the dreamscape in its rawest form. It could be used to heal, to change, to create. But it could also destroy, unravel, tear apart everything it touched. At the center of this void stood a figure that Reverie did not recognize at first. Tall, almost ethereal, the figure radiated an aura of ancient power, their form flickering like a distant star in the night sky. Their face was obscured, but their presence felt familiar, like a forgotten memory. "Why have you come?" The figure's voice was soft but resonant, echoing in Reverie's mind as if it had always been there, waiting for her to hear it. Reverie did not flinch, though her heart beat wildly in her chest. She had felt the presence of the abyss in her mind, its whispers tugging at her thoughts, but this was different. This was real. This was an entity of the abyss itself, something more than the mere energy she had been manipulating. "I need to understand," Reverie replied, her voice steady despite the tension that coiled in her gut. "I need to know what the abyss really is, what it means. The council taught me that it was evil, a force of destruction. But I feel differently. There is more to it. What are you?" The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, they extended a hand, and Reverie felt a surge of power pulse through the air. The darkness around her seemed to shift, revealing fragments of memories, fragments of past lives, of past wielders of the abyss. She saw images of ancient civilizations, their greatest minds harnessing the abyss's power to create wonders. She saw the destruction that followed, the abuse of that power leading to ruin. But there was something else, something new in the way the abyss was used. Reverie saw herself standing among the fragments, using the power of the abyss not to destroy, but to shape, to mold something new. The figure's voice echoed again, softer now, as if they were speaking directly into her mind. "The abyss is not what you have been taught. It is not inherently evil, nor is it inherently good. It is a force of potential, an energy that responds to the will of its wielder. Those who have come before you have been driven by their desires, their fears. They have used the abyss to create wonders and to bring ruin. But it is not the abyss that is to blame. It is the heart of the one who wields it." Reverie's eyes widened as understanding began to unfurl within her. The abyss was not an enemy nor a tool to be feared. It was a mirror reflecting the soul of its wielder. The energy it offered was neither good nor evil. It was simply what the one who called upon it made of it. "Why did the council not tell me this?" Reverie asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. "Why did they hide the truth from me?" The figure sighed, a sound like the rustling of wind through a vast, empty expanse. "Because they feared what you could become. They feared that you would be tempted by the power of the abyss and fall as so many others have. They believed that it was safer to keep the truth hidden, to keep you in the dark about its true nature. But now you know, and you must decide how you will wield this power." Reverie felt the weight of the decision settle in her chest. She had been cast out, exiled from the world she had known, and yet in this moment she felt more awake than ever before. The abyss was not her enemy. It was a tool that could either shape the world for good or destroy it. The choice now was hers. "I understand," Reverie said, her voice steady as she looked up at the figure, her resolve hardening like steel. "I will not let the abyss consume me. I will wield its power, but I will shape it, just as I shape the dreamscape. I will create. I will build something new, something that cannot be torn down by fear." The figure nodded, their form beginning to dissipate into the darkness. "Then you are ready, Reverie. You are ready to embrace the true nature of the abyss. But remember this, the abyss is not a force to be mastered. It is a force to be understood. You must never forget that. For if you do, it will consume you as it has consumed so many others." With that, the figure faded, leaving Reverie alone in the void, the weight of her newfound knowledge pressing on her like never before. The abyss was within her, and it was both a blessing and a curse. But now she knew how to wield it. She had awakened to its true nature, and in doing so had awakened something within herself. She was no longer just a dream weaver. She was something more. Something capable of shaping the very fabric of reality itself. And as she stepped forward into the unknown, Reverie knew that her journey had only just begun. Chapter 17. The Abyssal Heart. The world outside Dormiria had grown silent and still in the wake of Reverie's exile, as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. The abyss within her pulsed like a heartbeat, ever present, never fully silent. Its whispers echoed through her mind, urging her to go deeper, to search further into the unknown spaces between the waking world and the dreamscape. But this time the call was different. This time it was not just a beckoning, it was a command. Reverie stood on the precipice of the abyss, her feet planted firmly in the unknown. She had ventured far, deeper into the realm of raw dream energy than any dreamweaver had dared before. The knowledge she had gained, the truths that had been revealed to her, had shaped her into something new. No longer a simple weaver of dreams, she had become a seeker of the raw, primal force that lay hidden beneath the layers of the dreamscape. The abyss had revealed itself to her, but she had only scratched the surface. And now she was being drawn toward something deeper, something more dangerous. It was here, in the deepest recesses of the abyss, that Reverie discovered the abyssal heart. The heart was unlike anything she had ever seen or felt before. It pulsed with an energy so pure and untainted that it seemed to distort the very fabric of reality around it. This was the core of the abyss, the origin, the wellspring from which all of its power flowed. It was a swirling mass of raw, primordial energy, a fusion of dream and nightmare, creation and destruction, all bound together in a form that defied understanding. For a moment, Reverie hesitated. She had felt the power of the abyss within her, its weight pressing on her soul, but this was different. This was the source. The heart was the pinnacle of everything the abyss represented, the ultimate potential of its power. And it was here before her, just waiting to be harnessed. But the whispers of the abyss had grown louder. The voice inside her mind, once distant and quiet, now rang with a clarity that was both alluring and terrifying. Claim it, it urged. Embrace the heart and become one with the power you've always sought. It is your destiny. Reverie knew that the path she had chosen would not be easy. To wield this power was to risk everything. The heart, like the abyss itself, was neither good nor evil. It was simply a tool, one that would bend to the will of the one who controlled it. But the price of using such power was steep. To harness the heart's energy, Reverie would have to undergo a trial unlike any they had faced before. A trial that would demand not just their strength but their very identity. The abyss was not a force that could be conquered. It was a force that could only be understood, shaped, and tempered. And in order to do so, Reverie would have to change. The transformation is inevitable, the abyss whispered. To harness the heart's power is to risk everything you are. Your very soul will be tested. The air around Reverie crackled with the energy of the abyss, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The trial was not just a test of strength, it was a test of self. In order to wield the heart's power safely, Reverie would have to sacrifice something integral to their being. The transformation they would undergo would not just alter their body or their mind, it would alter their very essence. It was a risk that could cost them their soul, their memories, or even their identity. Reverie's heart raced. They had already felt the abyss changing them, warping their thoughts, their desires. But there was no turning back now. The path they had chosen had led them here, to this point of no return. The moment Reverie touched the abyssal heart, a wave of pure, unfiltered energy surged through their body. The world around them shattered like glass, fragments of light and shadow swirling together in an overwhelming torrent. For a moment, Reverie lost all sense of self. They were no longer an individual, no longer a dream weaver. They were part of something greater, something more primal, more ancient. The raw energy of the heart coursed through them, burning away their consciousness and leaving only the purest form of existence, the essence of a dream. The trial had begun. Reverie found themselves in a strange, shifting space, a place where time and reality had no meaning. The landscape was a bizarre, ever-changing reflection of their own mind, a realm where their deepest fears and desires were laid bare. The abyss was alive here, a sentient presence that surrounded them on all sides. It whispered to them, urging them to surrender, to give in to its pull. But Reverie resisted. They had not come this far to lose themselves now. "Who are you?" the abyss asked, its voice a strange mix of curiosity and threat. "What is it that you seek?" "I seek to understand," Reverie replied, their voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I seek to learn how to wield this power, to shape it without being consumed by it." The abyss laughed, a sound that echoed through the shifting landscape like thunder. "Understand? You seek understanding, but you have already been marked by the abyss. To wield the heart is to become it, to lose yourself in its endless depth." The ground beneath Reverie's feet trembled, and a dark figure rose from the shadows, a manifestation of their own fears, their doubts. It was an image of their former self, a twisted reflection of everything they had been before they embraced the abyss. The figure stared at Reverie with cold, judgmental eyes. "You will become me," the figure said, its voice a cruel mockery of Reverie's own. "You will lose yourself in the abyss, and there will be nothing left but emptiness." Reverie stood firm, their heart pounding in their chest. "I am not you. I am not a reflection of my fears. I am more than this. I will not lose myself." With a surge of willpower, Reverie reached out to the figure, their fingers brushing against the cold darkness. The figure shuddered as if the contact had burned it, and with a final scream, it vanished into the ether, leaving only silence behind. The trial had not been about defeating an external foe. It had been about facing the darkness within themselves. Reverie had confronted their own doubts, their fears of becoming consumed by the power of the abyss, and had emerged victorious. The abyss could change them, shape them, but it could not define them. Not unless they allowed it. As the landscape around them shifted once more, Reverie felt the power of the abyssal heart surge within them, flowing like a river through their veins. They had passed the trial, but the transformation had not been without cost. Reverie felt a change deep within themselves, something subtle but profound. They were no longer the same person who had first ventured into the abyss, nor were they the same dream weaver who had once shaped the dreams of mortals. They had crossed a line, a boundary between who they were and who they could become. The heart had granted them the power they sought, but it had also altered them. Reverie could feel the weight of this change, the sense of something greater, something darker, lingering beneath the surface of their consciousness. They had not been consumed by the abyss, but they had been forever marked by it. The trial had tested them not just as a dream weaver but as a person. It had asked who they truly were, and what they were willing to sacrifice in order to shape the power they had come to understand. Reverie had passed the trial, but the journey was far from over. The abyssal heart was now part of them, and they had to learn how to wield it carefully, lest it consume them in the end. As the landscape of the abyss faded into the distance, Reverie stood in silence, the power of the heart pulsing within them like a steady rhythm. They had unlocked something new within themselves, something greater than they had ever dreamed possible. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Reverie had become something more than a dream weaver. They had become the keeper of the abyss. And now, with the heart in their grasp, they would shape the future of both the dreamscape and the waking world. But they knew deep down that with great power came even greater responsibility. The abyss was not something to be wielded lightly, and Reverie would have to learn how to control it before it controlled them. Chapter 18. The Abyssal Guardian. Reverie stood at the edge of the abyss, their body alive with the hum of its power. The abyssal heart within them pulsed, a constant reminder of the dangerous yet tantalizing potential they now held. The trial of the heart had left its mark on them. Though they had passed the test, the transformation was far from over. Reverie had learned how to wield the power, but they had not yet learned how to master it. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with more trials and temptations. But there was one thing Reverie knew for certain. The abyss had changed everything. It had transformed their understanding of the world, and it had altered their very being. And now, as they ventured deeper into the heart of the abyss, they could sense that another trial awaited them. This one, however, would be different. It would not test their will nor their desires. It would test their very essence, the balance between the principles they had learned in Dormiria and the raw, unrestrained power they now wielded. As they walked further into the abyss, the world around them seemed to warp and shift. The ground beneath their feet became uneven, the air thick with an unnatural tension. Shadows stretched across the landscape, twisting into impossible shapes, whispering promises and threats alike. The abyss was alive here, and it was watching them. Every step Reverie took was like a heartbeat, echoing across the dreamscape, reverberating through the void. And then, through the ever-shifting darkness, a figure appeared. At first, it was just a silhouette, a shadow that seemed to flicker and pulse like a distant star. But as Reverie approached, the figure materialized into something far more ancient, far more terrifying. It was a being of pure shadow, its form tall and imposing, cloaked in robes that seemed to ripple and twist with the fabric of the abyss itself. Its eyes burned with an ethereal light, glowing faintly in the darkness. The air around it seemed to bend and distort, as if the very essence of reality was being altered by its presence. The abyssal guardian stood before Reverie, its form radiating an energy both majestic and terrifying, its mere existence a testament to the raw power of the abyss. The guardian was an ancient entity, one that had been bound to the heart of the abyss for eons. It was the protector of the heart, the one who ensured that only those truly worthy could access its power. And now it had come to challenge Reverie. "You are the one who has claimed the abyssal heart," the guardian's voice boomed, reverberating through Reverie's very soul. "You are the one who dares to wield its power. But tell me, Dreamweaver, what makes you worthy? What makes you think you can control the abyss without being consumed by it?" Reverie stood tall, feeling the weight of the guardian's gaze upon them. The challenge was clear. They had come here seeking power, but now they would have to prove themselves worthy of it. The abyss was not a force to be tamed. It was a force to be understood, balanced, and respected. To wield its power required not just strength, but wisdom and restraint. "I do not seek to control the abyss," Reverie replied, their voice steady despite the enormity of the task ahead. "I seek to understand it, to learn from it. I know the dangers of its power, but I also know its potential. I do not claim to be invincible, but I am willing to face the challenge." The guardian's glowing eyes narrowed, studying Reverie for a long moment. Then, with a flick of its hand, the world around them began to change. The landscape shifted, and Reverie found themselves standing in the center of a vast chasm, the walls towering above them like cliffs of jagged stone. The air was thick with a palpable tension, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. The abyss was alive here, swirling and writhing like a living organism, and it was clear that the guardian was about to test Reverie's resolve. "Your understanding is still shallow," the guardian intoned. "You claim to seek balance, but do you truly understand what that means? The abyss demands more than mere strength. It demands that you confront your deepest fears, your darkest desires. It demands that you face the very core of your being." Without warning, the ground beneath Reverie's feet began to crack, and from the fissures rose a host of shadowy figures, manifestations of Reverie's own fears and doubts. These were not mere illusions, not figments of the dreamscape. They were real, tangible reflections of the darkness within Reverie's soul. Each figure was an embodiment of a fear, a regret, a flaw they had carried with them for years. fears they had buried deep within themselves, refusing to confront. The first figure was a version of themselves, twisted and distorted, filled with rage and resentment. It was the version of Reverie who had once been consumed by their desire for power, the version who had craved recognition and approval from the council at any cost. The second figure was a shadow of doubt, a version of Reverie who questioned their every decision, their every choice. It whispered of failure, of inadequacy, of being unworthy of the abyss's power. It mocked Reverie's every effort to grow, to learn, to change. And the third figure was one of loneliness, a version of Reverie who had been abandoned, cast aside by those they had loved, and who feared that they would forever be alone, isolated in their pursuit of power. "Face them," the guardian commanded, its voice like thunder in the chasm. "Face your fears and prove that you are worthy of the power you seek. For if you cannot balance your desires with your true self, you will fall as so many others have." Reverie's heart pounded in their chest as the figures advanced, each one a reminder of the darkness they had buried deep within. They had feared this moment, feared confronting the very things that had shaped their journey, their choices. But now there was no turning back. If they were to wield the abyss's power, they had to face these fears head-on. The first figure, Rage, lunged at Reverie, its form contorting with fury. Reverie held their ground, calling upon the principles of Dormiria. They focused on the clarity of the dreamscape, the delicate balance of creation and destruction. The rage within them, the desire for vengeance, for validation, was something they had once embraced. But now they recognized it for what it was. A tool to be used, not a force to be unleashed. With a deep breath, Reverie reached into the abyss, channeling its power to calm the figure. The rage twisted and writhed but began to dissipate, its form losing its coherence as Reverie embraced the understanding that true power came from restraint, not destruction. The second figure, Doubt, approached, whispering its poison into Reverie's ear. "You are nothing," it hissed. "You are unworthy. You can never control the abyss. You will fail." Reverie felt the familiar pull of insecurity, but this time they met it with resolve. The abyss had given them power, but it had also given them the knowledge to trust in themselves. With that trust came confidence. They focused on their core, on their own worth, and the figure of Doubt faltered, its form unraveling in the face of their unwavering belief in their path. Finally, the figure of Loneliness appeared, its presence heavy with sorrow. It reached out to Reverie, showing them images of those they had lost, of their exile from Dormiria, of the pain of being alone in a world they no longer recognized. But Reverie did not flinch. They had learned that they were not alone, not truly. The abyss had become a part of them, and through their journey they had found strength in themselves. The loneliness faded as they embraced the truth that even in isolation, they were not without purpose. With each figure that dissolved into the ether, Reverie felt a deeper understanding take root. They were not perfect, but they were whole. They were not immune to fear, but they had the strength to confront it. The abyss was not a force that would consume them. It was a power that could be shaped, balanced, and understood. It was not a weapon. It was a tool, and like any tool, its worth was defined by the hands that wielded it. The last of the figures dissolved, and the chasm fell silent. Reverie stood alone, their body trembling with the exertion of the trial. The abyssal guardian watched, its eyes gleaming with approval. "You have passed," the guardian intoned. "You have proven your worth. You have shown that you understand the balance between light and shadow, creation and destruction. The abyss will not consume you. It will be yours to command." Reverie nodded, a sense of calm settling over them. They had passed the trial, not just of strength but of self. They had confronted the darkness within themselves and emerged stronger for it. "Thank you," Reverie whispered, their voice filled with gratitude. "I will wield this power wisely." The guardian nodded once, its form beginning to fade into the shadows of the abyss. "Remember, Dreamweaver, the power you seek is not without consequence. Never forget the balance. For in the abyss, even the slightest misstep can lead to the greatest fall." With those final words, the guardian vanished, leaving Reverie standing at the edge of the abyss, their heart filled with both power and humility. The journey was far from over, but now they were truly ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Reverie had become the true master of the abyss, not by conquering it but by understanding it. And in doing so, they had taken the first step toward a future that would shape both the waking world and the dreamscape for generations to come. Chapter 19. Redemption and Return. The journey had taken Reverie far from Dormiria. It had pushed them beyond the borders of the dreamscape they had known, into the deepest, most dangerous corners of the abyss and back again. They had faced trials that tested their very soul, confronted their darkest fears, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the primal power they now wielded. The abyss had not consumed them as it had others, but had instead shaped them into something different. Someone who understood the balance between creation and destruction, light and shadow, order and chaos. Now, as Reverie stood before the gates of Dormiria once more, their heart was a storm of conflicting emotions. The city loomed in the distance, its towers and spires bathed in the golden light of dawn. This was where it had all begun, where they had first learned the craft of dream weaving, where they had been both revered and scorned. It was here that they had once believed in the teachings of the council, in the principles they had been taught from the moment they were born. But everything had changed. The abyss had shown them a truth that the council had kept hidden, a truth that had shattered the very foundation of their beliefs. The power of the abyss was not inherently evil, as the council had insisted. It was not a force to be feared or repressed. It was a tool, one that could be wielded for both creation and destruction. It was a force that could be shaped, tempered, and understood, but only if one was willing to confront its darkness, to embrace both its light and shadow. Reverie had returned not just to reconcile with the council, but to challenge them, to reveal the truths they had learned and force the council to confront the very dogma they had long upheld. They had learned to wield the abyss's power, but they had also learned to respect it. And in that respect they had found their true path. As they walked through the streets of Dormiria, the city felt strangely unfamiliar. The towering buildings, the winding alleys, the shimmering fountains, all of it seemed distant now, as if it belonged to another life. The people, too, seemed different, their eyes averted as they passed, their gazes fleeting, filled with whispers and speculation. Reverie had not returned as a mere dream weaver, but as something far more potent. Their very presence felt like a disruption in the delicate balance of the dreamscape, a reminder of the power that lay just beneath the surface. At last they reached the council's tower, the heart of Dormiria's power. The spires rose like jagged peaks against the sky, their dark outlines cutting through the clouds. Reverie's breath caught in their throat. This was it. The moment of reckoning. The guards at the entrance eyed Reverie warily but made no move to stop them. The council had been watching, of course. How could they not? Reverie had not returned in secret, and the rumors of their exile, their transformation, had already spread throughout the city like wildfire. It was inevitable that they would be summoned here to stand before the council, to answer for their transgressions. Inside the tower, the air was thick with tension. The council chambers were vast, a towering hall of marble and glass, filled with the quiet hum of power. Reverie stood before the high table, the 13 members of the council seated in judgment. Their eyes were cold, unreadable, their faces betraying nothing. These were the architects of Dormiria's dreamscape, the ones who had guided Reverie's path from the beginning, the ones who had exiled them when they had dared to reach beyond the council's narrow understanding of the world. But Reverie was no longer the same person who had once looked up to these figures with admiration and fear. They had learned too much, seen too much. The truth of the abyss had transformed them, had made them question everything the council had taught. The head of the council, a tall and imposing figure with eyes like chips of obsidian, leaned forward. "Reverie," they said, their voice a deep, resonant echo that filled the chamber. "You have returned. After everything. Tell us why. What is it that you hope to accomplish by standing before us now? Reverie's gaze swept across the council. They could see the skepticism in their eyes, the judgment. But there was also something else. Something fleeting, something almost like curiosity. They had once believed in the dogma of Dormiria. They had once thought that the council held all the answers, that their vision of the dreamscape was the only true way. But now, after everything they had experienced, Reverie knew better. I have returned, Reverie began, their voice steady, because I have learned the truth that you have hidden from us all. They took a deep breath, feeling the power of the abyss within them, yet careful to control it. This was not a moment for outbursts. This was a moment for clarity. The abyss is not a force of corruption, Reverie continued, their eyes locking with the council leader. It is not an evil to be feared, nor a power to be suppressed. It is a tool, a primal energy that exists within the fabric of the dreamscape, just like the light and the shadow, the creation and the destruction. It is both, not one or the other. And it can be wielded not just by those who follow the teachings of Dormiria, but by those who understand it. A murmur rippled through the council, some faces hardening in disbelief, others furrowing in confusion. But Reverie did not flinch. They had come too far to back down now. You accuse me of defiling the dreamscape with the abyss's power, Reverie continued, their voice growing firmer. But I have not corrupted it. I have only unlocked a new understanding. The abyss is not a plague. It is a force of transformation. It is a power that can be used for both good and ill, depending on the will of the one who wields it. And I too have learned to wield it. The council leader's expression remained inscrutable, but there was a flicker of something in their eyes. A hint of recognition, perhaps, or even fear. But Reverie pressed on. I do not seek to destroy Dormiria, they said, their voice unwavering. I seek to rebuild it, to show you that there is more to this world than the narrow boundaries we have imposed upon it. The dreamscape is not a place to be controlled. It is a place to be understood. And in that understanding, we can shape a future where creation and destruction are not enemies, but partners. A long silence followed. The council members exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Reverie stood before them, their heart pounding, but they knew that they had spoken the truth. The truth they had learned in the depths of the abyss. The truth they had uncovered through the trials, the pain, and the transformation. Finally, the council leader spoke, their voice low but filled with a weight that Reverie could not ignore. You speak of transformation, Reverie. But what of the cost? What of the dangers of wielding such power? What of the consequences of unleashing the abyss upon the dreamscape? Reverie paused, considering the question carefully. I know the cost. I have felt it, lived it. But I also know that without change we stagnate. Dormiria's dreamscape is stagnant. Its teachings are outdated, trapped in the past. If we are to move forward, we must learn to embrace the darkness as well as the light. We must learn to balance creation and destruction, to understand that both are necessary. Another silence, but this one felt different. It was not one of rejection, but of contemplation. Reverie could see the doubt in the eyes of the council members now, the seeds of change taking root. Perhaps they had not been wrong all along, but perhaps they had been blinded by their own fear of the unknown. We will need time, the council leader said finally, their voice softer than before. Time to consider what you have said. Time to reflect on the implications of your words. Reverie nodded. I understand. But know this, I will not turn back. The abyss has shown me a new path, one that leads not to destruction but to renewal. And if you choose to reject this path, I will walk it alone. But I hope you will see the truth of what I have learned, and join me in shaping a new future for Dormiria. With that, Reverie turned and walked from the council chamber, their heart filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They had returned to Dormiria, not as a supplicant, but as a teacher, as someone who had learned the truth and was willing to challenge the very foundation of their world. The future was uncertain, but Reverie had already taken the first step. And with the abyss at their side, they would not stop until they had transformed the dreamscape, until they had brought about a new dawn for Dormiria, one where the light and the shadow could coexist, where the dreamscape would no longer be a place of limitation, but a realm of infinite possibility. Chapter 20. The Awakening Dream. Reverie stood at the edge of the dream spire, the highest tower in Dormiria, gazing out over the city. Below, the dreamscape stretched in all its glory, a landscape of both serene beauty and shifting chaos. The sun hung low in the sky, casting its golden light over the shimmering towers and the tranquil rivers, while the shadows of the coming night began to creep in, soft and gentle. The dreamscape, like the waking world, was a balance of opposites: light and shadow, creation and destruction, hope and despair. And Reverie, in their newfound understanding, had become the bridge between those realms. The abyss no longer loomed over them as an oppressive force. It was not a power to be feared, nor a power to be worshipped. It was a tool, one they had come to know intimately. It was a part of the dreamscape, just as the golden light of Dormiria was, just as the dark shadows of the night sky were. The abyss was not the enemy. It was simply another aspect of existence that required understanding. And now Reverie had achieved that understanding. It had not been an easy journey. It had taken everything they had, every ounce of willpower, every lesson learned from the depths of the abyss and the teachings of Dormiria. There had been moments of doubt, moments when the weight of the power they wielded threatened to crush them. But with each step forward, with each new challenge they overcame, Reverie had grown stronger. And more importantly, they had learned to balance the conflicting forces within them. The council had not rejected them outright. Though they had not embraced the full scope of Reverie's vision, they had acknowledged the validity of the journey. They had listened, and for the first time in a long while they had questioned their own dogma. The council was not yet ready to completely abandon their old ways, but they were beginning to see that change was inevitable. And in the midst of that uncertainty, Reverie had found their place, not as an adversary to Dormiria, but as a guide, a bridge between the past and the future. As Reverie stood on the dream spire, they felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The abyss was no longer a shadow that followed them, a temptation they had to resist. It was a part of them, a part of the dreamscape just as much as the light of Dormiria. They had not conquered the abyss, they had reconciled with it. And in doing so they had unlocked a new purpose. Reverie, a voice called, pulling them from their reverie. It was Lyra, a fellow dreamweaver who had once been their closest friend, now standing beside them on the dream spire. Her eyes were filled with a mix of awe and concern. "Lyra," Reverie replied, offering a small smile. "I've been thinking." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous." Reverie chuckled softly. "I suppose it is, but this time it feels different. I've seen the abyss, Lyra. I've been to the depths of it, and I've learned that it is not the force of destruction we once thought it was. It is a force of transformation, a force that can heal as much as it can destroy. The council doesn't understand that. Not yet, but I hope that one day they will." Lyra's expression softened. "You're going to change everything, aren't you?" Reverie nodded, their gaze returning to the city below. "Not everything, just the way we see the dreamscape. I want to help guide both mortals and dreamweavers, to help them find healing through the balance of light and shadow. The abyss is not a curse, Lyra. It's part of us, part of all things. If we learn to embrace it, to understand it, we can change the very nature of the dreams we weave." Lyra was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching Reverie's face. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Then I will help you, whatever it takes." Reverie smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Lyra. I can't do this alone." And so, with Lyra by their side, Reverie set about creating a new path. They would not force the council's hand, but they would work from within. They would help the people of Dormiria, both the dream weavers and the mortals they guided, see that the abyss was not something to be feared, but something to be understood. The dreamscape could not be a place of pure light or pure darkness. It was the balance between them that gave it life. The first step was simple but profound. Reverie began to teach. They shared their knowledge of the abyss with other dream weavers, showing them how to weave its power into the dreamscapes they created. They taught them to use it not as a tool of destruction but as a tool of growth. It could be used to heal, to guide, to help mortals confront their deepest fears and traumas, and to bring balance to the fractured worlds within their dreams. Reverie's influence spread slowly, quietly, but with each passing day more dream weavers came to understand what they had learned. Dormiria began to change, not in the grand, sweeping way Reverie had once envisioned, but in a subtle, profound shift. The people of Dormiria began to see their dreams in a new light, to understand that the shadows within them were not to be banished, but embraced. The dark corners of their minds, once ignored or suppressed, became places of healing and transformation. Mortals, too, began to feel the effects of this new way of dreaming. Nightmares, once unrelenting and filled with terror, began to shift in nature. They became more manageable, more navigable. Reverie helped mortals face the darkness of their past, to confront the traumas that had shaped them. And in doing so, they helped them heal, helped them grow. But there was still much work to be done. The council remained cautious, wary of the power that Reverie wielded. Though they had not outright rejected Reverie's teachings, they were still hesitant to embrace the abyss fully. And there were those among the dream weavers who resisted, who still clung to the old ways, to the teachings that had shaped their world for so long. Change, even in its most subtle form, was never easy. But Reverie was undeterred. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they also knew that they were no longer walking it alone. They had Lyra, and they had the power of the abyss by their side, not as a master but as an ally, a partner in the dance of light and shadow. And with that understanding, with that balance, Reverie knew that the dreamscape would never be the same again. They were the bridge between the light and the dark, the waking and the dreaming, the known and the unknown. They were the weaver of worlds, and they had found their true purpose, to guide both mortals and dream weavers alike toward healing and growth, united by the transformative power of both light and shadow. In the end, Reverie had not just become the master of the abyss. They had become the master of balance itself. And in that balance they had found peace.
You've just finished the concluding chapters of Mistwoven Legends, The Awakening Dream, written by Raul, and I'm your host Nayara, an Audible Archives original. But this is not the end. The mists do not part so easily. Ahead lies another tale, a darker thread waiting to be unraveled in Book 2, Mistwoven Legends, Threads of the Forgotten. If this first book carried you into the heart of the dream, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Your support keeps the story alive and ensures you'll be here when the next legend awakens. Until then, guard your steps and guard your dreams.
Another chapter closes, but the archives remain, waiting for the next seeker of stories. Here, no voice is lost, no tale truly ends. This is Audible Archives. Until we meet again, may your mind wander freely and your heart never forget the stories we share.